Welcome back everyone to the second video where the Kudoz Coaches are exploring identity. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about the different parts of our identities and how to develop a productive and useful relationship with those parts. We'll also be talking about acceptance, what that means, and I finally want to talk about strengths and how taking a strengths focus can be really useful when we're thinking about who we are. When we ask ourselves the question, who are we? I think it is a difficult question to ask, and you've seen in the previous video how some of the Kudoz team, how different some of our answers were. But I think if we're looking at it in practical terms, we can really break down that question into figuring out what are the different parts of my identity. And I think that there's two kind of important parts of our identity. There's the parts that we get to choose, and there's the parts that we don't get to choose. Those parts that we get to choose are the kinds of things that are like our activities. For example, if I'm a person who chooses to be active every day and who chooses to go to the gym, then part of my identity becomes or is shaped by those choices, by me being someone who goes to the gym. Or if you're a person who likes to eat healthy, part of your identity is shaped by the choices that you make to eat that healthy food. We can also choose kind of the way that we act with other people. We can act politely, and we could identify as someone who acts politely or tries to be friendly, or there's all sorts of aspects of who we are that are kind of determined by the choices that we make, and we have quite a big hand in shaping what our identity is through the choices that we make on a daily basis. There are also parts of our identity that we can't control. So where we're born, for example, I was born in a particular spot and I had no choice about the matter. It just happened, right? And you were born in a particular spot, same thing. We can't choose how tall we get. Whatever powers that be that decide how tall we're going to be, decided that I was going to be this height, or decided that you were going to be your height, and there's not that much you can do about it except wear shoes with thick heels, I guess. We can't change, for example, our eye color, or we can't change the language that we grew up with. We can't change the culture, the background that we come from. These are all parts of our identity that are kind of lumped in to us at the beginning, and they just form a part of us. We can't choose the culture that we come from. We're born into a specific group of human beings who think in a specific way, and the way that they think kind of affects us and affects how we decide to think about the world, and affects how we decide to think about ourselves and our identities. Importantly, we can't control what other people think of us. There's too many people. We can't keep track of every single person that meets us. We can't form the perfect image of who we are in their heads. So I think it's important to kind of accept some of the things that we can't control, and also reflect on the parts of our identity that we can control. Can you think of parts of your identity that you can control? Sometimes parts of our identity can be difficult to reckon with. This can be because of a massive shift in our situations. It could be any other number of reasons. We might just feel uncomfortable with who we are, or have some reckoning to do with who we are. Being who we are can be tough. Everyone's got things that they would rather be different. Everyone's got things that they're proud of. In the cases where being who we are is tough, I found that a really useful tool for me is kind of acceptance. And when I say acceptance, I don't mean kind of resigning myself to like the despair of, oh, things will never get better. It's not kind of focusing on that negative. It's about being honest with ourselves about the present situation, so that we can build our next move forwards. acceptance is about being generous to ourselves, allowing ourselves the space to be flawed, kind of telling myself, Luke, you're a human being, you're going to make mistakes, and some parts of who you are, you might not be the happiest about. You can always kind of take those parts where I can make choices about my identity, focus on that, because that's where I can really make meaningful change. A basketball player might wish that they were taller so that they could dunk, and they might spend hours and hours and hours kind of thinking to myself, oh, I wish I was taller, I wish I was the type of person that could dunk on the hoop. But it's not until they kind of accept that they're not that tall that they can think to themselves, oh, maybe I should focus on the other areas of basketball that I can be really good at. Maybe I should become a really good dribbler. So kind of accepting one kind of area where the basketball player might not be great will shift and steer that basketball player's focus for the future, and shift and steer their plans into something where they can really become the most skillful person out there. They just need to put their energies into the right area. And that being said, being 6 foot tall is not a requirement to be a basketball player. You see the point guard, and look, I don't know that much about basketball. You see the point guard, and they're passing the ball around and kind of managing their team, and usually they're the shortest person on the field, but they're one of the most important people. So acceptance, and those point guards have had to accept that they're not going to be super tall, and it's allowed them to kind of refocus their energies and choose the right way forward to their goals of being a basketball star. I've asked the coaches to share a little bit about their identities, in particular areas of their identities that they struggled with, because everybody struggles with some areas of their identity. So here's some videos of the coaches sharing a bit about some things that they've had trouble accepting, or they're still working on accepting.
When I was younger, I had a really hard time with being so small. I was always very petite, and especially in my teens and early 20s, my friends towered above me, and I was always mistaken for being much younger than I was. And oftentimes, it made me lose my confidence. As I've grown older, I love it now when people mistake me for being younger. But on a serious note, now that I have children and they are also really small, I do sometimes feel triggered when people comment on how small they are. But what I try to remind myself, and what I try to teach my children as well, is that the very thing that we consider to be our flaws, they're there to teach us something. And if we can lean in and learn to accept those things, then we can show up in this world and be the very best version of ourselves. And we give ourselves permission to shine bright.
For me, I think one part of my identity that I've really struggled with, and acceptance has been a long road for me, it actually has to do with my health. And so I used to be a very sporty person. I used to compete at quite a high level in soccer and rugby, and it was a huge part of my life. And there came a time where I had just gotten injured too many times, and I had to really, for my own health, completely stop sports. And I mean, this was a massive change in my identity. It completely shifted who I was, and accepting that is really a difficult thing. It took me a really long time. I struggled against it. I would go do sports again, get injured again, and just really the situation was bad until the point where I was like, Luke, you can't do this anymore. But accepting it kind of allowed me to shift my energies in different directions. I started, instead of sports, I thought, how can I move my body? Because I need to move my body, but I have to be safe. And I started taking up dance instead. And kind of that acceptance has allowed me to move on, even though I still struggle with it, has allowed me to move on positively and focus on the rest of my life.
Hey, this is Tamsin. Today we're talking about identity with Luke, and I just wanted to share a little bit about a memory that I have of struggling with my identity when I was younger. So we moved around a lot when I was a kid, always starting different schools, and I grew up in Alberta at that time, and there was not a lot of kids that were Asian in Alberta or half Asian as I am. So I got made fun of. Often I remember wishing that I was blonde with blue eyes for a long time. Like, why can't I be blonde with blue eyes? It wasn't until I got a little bit older that I realized and accepted that I couldn't change what I was, and that it's okay to be different. It's okay not to fit in like everybody else. I learned that we are all unique, that we are all meant to be different from one another. Yet we are all so similar at the same time. We are all awesome, just different flavors of awesome. And sometimes it's that unique quality that can often be our biggest strength.
What are some parts of your identity that you cannot change? And what does acceptance mean to you? Acceptance can be a great tool to choose where to focus our energies in the right area. But it does not have to be all about the negative. In fact, the most useful part of acceptance is turning our focus towards our strengths. A big part of turning our focus towards our strengths is choosing to ask ourselves the question, what are my strengths? It's not something that I ask myself all the time, but when I kind of examine what am I naturally good at, what areas do I excel in, and kind of play with those strengths, I can figure out how to put myself in situations where I'm going to be able to use those strengths. Accepting myself as a whole package, with the strengths and the flaws, is the best way for me to make sure that I'm moving forwards. When we know and accept our strengths, we have a good idea of how to tackle certain situations. By being honest with ourselves about where we excel, we often find the most efficient way forwards. I'm not the most artistic person in the world, but I think that I'm good at writing comparatively. So in a situation where I might want to be kind of creative, maybe it's I want to show somebody that I care about them and kind of express myself. Maybe I won't try and do a drawing because the drawing will look ugly. Instead, I'll focus on my strength, which is writing, and use that as my way through the situation. Some people might sing to express themselves. Some people might draw or move their bodies. Accepting that I'm not currently good at a thing does not mean accepting I will never be good at that thing. We have to remember our growth mindset and kind of being comfortable in the fact that yes, we change over time and we can develop those areas that perhaps right now we're not that good at, but we would like to get better at. And that will take time and practice. We can develop our toolkit of strengths by learning new strengths. That being said, accepting where our strengths are right now, in the present moment, is a great step to seeing the path forward in dealing with a tough situation. Check out this list of strengths from Positive Psychology. What are your strengths? What are you really good at? Next week we'll continue our focus on identity, and perhaps the challenge for the week is thinking more about what our strengths are, but also kind of putting those strengths into action. So if there's a situation that you come across during the week where you're thinking, how would I best approach this? Think back to yourself, what were those strengths that I identified? And then think, how can I use those strengths in this situation?